Behind the polished chrome of the future lies a revelation that will shake the very foundations of everything you believe. Join us as we uncover the secrets of a world where technology and human nature collide in spectacular fashion. Click subscribe now and witness the unfolding of a new reality. Imagine Christmas Eve. The tree is lit, the grandchildren are running through the halls, and my daughter stands in the kitchen doorway with a folder of legal papers and says, "Dad, if you don't sign this tonight, you won't be seeing the kids for Christmas." I set down my coffee cup, looked at her for a long moment, and walked out the front door without a word. The next morning, her husband showed up at my motel room with his collar loose and his hands shaking, and it seemed like that was only the beginning. Before we go any further, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I love knowing who's out there listening. My name is Robert Harwell. I'm 68 years old. I spent 41 years as a licensed electrician in Millbrook, Ohio, and I have the hearing loss and the bad knee to prove it. My wife, Patricia, passed 4 years ago from a stroke that came without warning on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in the driveway checking the brake lights on her car when the neighbor called my name in a voice I had never heard from her before, and I knew before I even turned around. After Patricia died, my daughter, Diane, asked me to come stay with them. She and her husband, Craig, had a 4-bedroom house in Cloverfield Heights that they'd bought with a down payment I provided. Their 2 kids, my granddaughter Sophie, who was 9 at the time, and my grandson Marcus, who was 7, needed stability, Diane said. And honestly, so did I. Patricia and I had been married 39 years. I didn't know how to boil an egg for one person. I didn't know how to sit in silence without it becoming something unbearable. So I moved into their guest room with my toolbox, my work clothes, and a framed photo of Patricia from our trip to Niagara Falls in 1998. "She's laughing at something," I said, her hair blowing sideways, squinting into the sun. She looked like the best thing that ever happened to me, which she was. The arrangement made sense on paper. I helped with the kids in the morning so Diane could get to her job at the dental office without stress. I handled every repair the house needed, which was substantial because Craig's idea of fixing something was calling someone else to fix it. I replaced the water heater. I rewired the basement after an inspector flagged 3 violations Craig had let slide for 2 years. I repainted the garage. I laid new tile in both bathrooms because the grout had gone black and Sophie had started getting rashes on her feet. And every first of the month, I transferred $1,200 into their joint account. Not because they asked, because I knew what a mortgage cost in Cloverfield Heights and I knew what Craig made at his sales job and I did the math. Patricia always said I was too practical about love, that I showed it in receipts instead of words. She wasn't wrong, but receipts are honest. Receipts don't disappear. For 3 years, things were manageable. Not perfect. Craig had a way of making me feel like a house guest who had overstayed his welcome. He'd walk past me at the kitchen table without speaking. He'd change the television channel while I was watching something without asking. Small things. The kind of things you can't quite complain about without sounding petty. But they accumulated the way water damage does, invisible until the ceiling falls in. Diane noticed, but said nothing. She had a talent for standing exactly between 2 people in conflict and making herself invisible to both of them. I'd learned not to push her on it. She had her mother's eyes and her father's stubbornness, and that combination made her impossible to argue with and very easy to love despite everything. The Christmas Eve that broke it started normally enough. I'd spent the afternoon helping Sophie build a gingerbread house on the kitchen table. Marcus kept stealing the candy decorations, and Sophie kept threatening to tell on him, and I kept pretending not to notice either of them. Patricia used to run the same operation every December. Same arguments, same candy theft, same threats. Some things carry forward even after the person who started them is gone. Craig came home at 6 in a suit he hadn't loosened yet, which meant the workday had gone badly. He poured himself a drink before he even took off his coat. I recognized the sign and excused myself to the living room. Diane appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. She was holding a manila folder against her chest, the way you hold something you're not sure you want to hand over. "Dad, can we sit down for a minute?" Craig came in behind her and stood near the window with his drink. facing away from me. Not participating, but not leaving either. Diane sat across from me on the edge of the armchair. The folder went onto the coffee table between us. She pushed it toward me slowly. The way you slide something toward an animal you're not sure about. We've been talking to a financial advisor, she started, and an attorney. And they suggested that for planning purposes, it might make sense for you to give Craig and me power of attorney over your accounts. I looked at the folder but didn't open it. Planning for what? For your future. In case something happens. You're 68, Dad. You live alone. Technically, if you had a health event, we'd have no way to. I live here, I said. In your guest room. Craig turned from the window. In our home, he said, which is different. That was the first honest thing he'd said to me in 3 years. I opened the folder. The document was 12 pages. My name appeared in it 47 times. I didn't count while I was sitting there, but I counted later, alone in my room, because that's the kind of thing I do when I'm trying to understand something that doesn't make sense. The language gave Diane and Craig authority over my bank accounts, my pension disbursement, and my property decisions. It was not a healthcare directive. It was not a limited power of attorney for a specific purpose. It was a document that would make my money their money at my signature. I set it down on the coffee table. Where did this come from? Diane's hands folded in her lap. We want to make sure you're protected. This doesn't protect me. Dad. I stood. The folder stayed on the table. I need to think about this. Craig finally turned from the window. We were hoping you'd sign it tonight. The attorney needs it before the new year for tax purposes. I looked at my daughter and waited for her to say something that would make this make sense. She looked at the floor. If you're not comfortable, Craig continued, his voice slipping into the register he used when he was about to say something he'd prepared in advance, then we need to talk about whether this living arrangement is still working for everyone. I picked up my coffee cup from the side table. Patricia's voice came to me clearly, the way it does sometimes when I need it. Don't say something you can't unsay, Robert. I set the cup back down. I walked to the guest room. I took my suitcase from the closet shelf, the brown leather one with the broken zipper Patricia had asked me to fix for 6 years. I never fixed it. I kept meaning to. I packed my 3 flannel shirts, my 2 pairs of work pants, my good jacket, and Patricia's photo from the nightstand. My toolbox was already in the back of my truck where it always lived. I'd been a field electrician long enough to never leave tools inside a building that wasn't mine. Diane was standing at the end of the hallway when I came out. Dad. Wait. I'm not signing that document, Diane. I know. She pressed her palms together. We can talk about this differently. Craig. Just. I put my hand up gently. Not tonight. She stepped aside. I don't know if she wanted to stop me, or if she was relieved she didn't have to. I've turned it over enough times since then that I still can't answer it. The front door closed behind me. The porch light was on. The one I'd replaced the fixture for back in September because the old one had a short. The Christmas lights I'd hung along the roofline 2 weeks earlier blinked slow and blue against the dark. I sat in my truck in the driveway for 11 minutes. I know because the dashboard clock was the one thing in that vehicle I'd ever fixed on schedule. Then I drove. The Millbrook Motor Inn sits on Route 9 about 4 miles from downtown. It's not the worst motel in the county, but it's not trying hard either. The man at the desk had the resigned expression of someone who had seen every version of Christmas Eve that existed. He took my credit card without comment. Room 14 smelled like industrial cleaner, an old carpet, and the particular sadness of a space that nobody had ever called home. An orange bedspread, a window unit that rattled when the heat kicked on, a lamp on the nightstand with a shade tilted 10 degrees to the left. I set Patricia's photo on the nightstand and angled it toward the bed. Well, I told her. Merry Christmas. My phone buzzed at 9:47. Diane. I watched it ring. Then Craig's name appeared, which surprised me enough that I almost answered. Then Diane again. Then a text from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Craig's work cell, which told me he'd planned for the possibility that I wouldn't answer his personal number, which told me he'd thought about this more than one conversation. I pulled out the small notebook I keep in my shirt pocket for job estimates, and I did what I always do when something is too big to feel. I turned it into numbers. Savings, $62,000. Built across 41 years of skipping things Patricia said we should do, and doing them anyway on a smaller scale. Monthly pension, $1,900, from the union after 4 decades. Social Security, 8 to 10. Monthly mortgage transfers to Diane and Craig, $1,200, which I had on automatic. Monthly total outgoing to them, $1,200. 3 years, $43,200. That was the automatic payment. It didn't include the down payment on their house, which was $28,000 from the sale of the smaller house Patricia and I had owned before we moved in. It didn't include Diane's student loans, $18,000 I co-signed and quietly covered when she fell behind during the year Marcus was born and the dental office cut her hours. It didn't include the basement rewiring, the water heater, the tile, the bathrooms, 2 car repairs when Craig's Audi threw a belt twice in 6 months, or the Christmas presents I bought for every member of the household every year because I didn't know how to show up empty-handed to a room full of people I loved. The running total, worked out in my notebook in the dim light of room 14, was just over $96,000 across 4 years. I drew a line under it and wrote, "They want more." Then I canceled the December mortgage transfer. My thumb was steadier than I expected. I slept badly and woke up early. The coffee from the lobby machine tasted like hot water that had met a coffee bean briefly and moved on. I drank 2 cups and watched the parking lot lighten from black to gray to the flat white of Ohio in December. The knock came at 8:19. 3 short, 2 slow. Craig's knock, which I recognized because he used the same pattern on the guest room door when he wanted something. I'd always found it odd that a man who couldn't look at me over breakfast had a signature knock. I sat still. "Robert." His voice came through the cheap door like it was balsa wood. "I know you're awake. Your truck's been running." I hadn't realized I'd left it running. Old habit from cold mornings on job sites. "I need to talk to you." Man to man. I stood and opened the door because I was curious what man to man meant to Craig. He looked like the night had not been kind to him. His hair was uncombed. His coat was his good wool, one thrown over a sweatshirt, and he was holding a gas station coffee cup with both hands. He looked younger and worse and more honest than he had in 3 years. "Can I come in?" "No." But I opened the door wider, which let him stand in the threshold out of the cold. He looked at Patricia's photo on the nightstand and looked away. "The automatic payment didn't go through this morning," he said. "I know. Diane's calling the bank. She won't find anything wrong with the bank." That landed. He was quiet for a moment. "We need that payment, Robert. The mortgage is. I know what the mortgage is. I know it down to the decimal." He shifted his weight. "Look, last night, got out of hand. The attorney thought the POA was a good idea for everyone. A power of attorney that gives you access to my pension and my savings is not a good idea for me. We're not going to steal from you. Then you don't need the document." He stared at me for a moment. He wasn't a stupid man. He was a man who had made a calculation and found out it was wrong. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "The mortgage company will flag it by the 15th, he said. "I'm aware of how mortgages work, Craig. We could lose the house. That's a decision you'll need to make." He put his hand on the doorframe. "The kids," he started. I raised my hand the same way I'd raised it at Diane in the hallway, and he stopped. "Don't do that." Something shifted in his face. The calculation was still running, but it had hit a wall. He left without getting what he came for. I watched his Audi pull out of the lot and turn toward Cloverfield Heights. Then I put on my jacket, picked up my keys, and went to find breakfast. Millie's Diner on Garfield Street had been in the same location since 1987 and smelled like it in the best possible way. Bacon and coffee and the faint ghost of cigarette smoke that no renovation had ever fully erased. A hand-lettered sign by the register said, "Merry Christmas. We're open because somebody has to be." The counter stool I chose was second from the left. I'd sat there 3 times a week for 11 years, and the vinyl had a specific wear pattern I recognized. The woman who poured my coffee without asking was named Gwen, and she'd worked the morning shift at Millie's since her youngest started kindergarten in 2009. She had the particular radar of people who spend 40 hours a week watching strangers. She looked at me once, refilled the cup she'd just filled, and said, "Who did it?" My daughter. Tell me. So I told her. The whole thing, starting with the folder and ending with Craig in the doorway this morning. Gwen listened without interrupting, which was her gift. She refilled my coffee twice and brought me eggs I hadn't ordered because she knew I wouldn't ask. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Power of attorney, she said. Legal language for access to my accounts. While you're still alive and healthy. While I'm still alive and healthy. She set down the coffee pot. She had a son she'd put through 2 years of community college by working doubles on Saturdays. She understood the math of sacrifice the way it actually works, not the way it looks in legal documents. You know Dennis Hartley? She asked. The name was familiar. Retired judge, I said. Lives on Prescott? His wife runs that group. Senior legal aide. Out of the community center. Tuesdays. She slid a napkin across the counter with a phone number on it in ballpoint pen. Her handwriting was decisive and even the handwriting of someone who leaves notes for people and means them to be read. She's good people, Gwen said. And she's got access to an attorney who doesn't charge seniors for the first consultation. I folded the napkin into my shirt pocket. The community center on Tuesdays smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax and the remnants of a children's craft project that had involved glitter and optimism. 7 people sat in folding chairs, arranged in an approximate circle. A woman in her early 60s with close-cropped gray hair and a yellow legal pad stood near a table with a coffee urn and a plate of store-brand cookies. Her name was Helen Hartley, and she moved through the room like someone who had stopped wasting motion a long time ago. You called about the legal aid program, she said. Robert? Yes. Carl's in the back. He'll be out in 10 minutes. In the meantime, sit down and listen, and tell us what you're dealing with when you're ready. I sat. I listened. A man named Jean, 73, whose daughter had convinced him to add her name to his property deed for simplicity, and who had discovered last month that she'd listed the house for sale without telling him. A woman named Ruth, 66, whose son had borrowed against her retirement savings using a loan she'd co-signed and then stopped making payments on. A man named Victor, 68 years old, retired plumber, who had paid his son's business expenses for 4 years and been told at Christmas dinner that he was unwelcome because he made the daughter-in-law uncomfortable. Same story, I thought. Different zip codes. My turn came without ceremony. I stood, because standing steadies me. My daughter asked me to sign a power of attorney, giving her and her husband control of my accounts on Christmas Eve. When I refused, I was told the living arrangement was no longer working. I left. I've been at the Millbrook Motor Inn for 6 days. Jean leaned forward. How much have you put in? Across 4 years? 96,000, give or take. Ruth's hand went to her mouth. Carl Mitchell appeared from the back office at that moment. A man in his late 50s with a mechanic's hands and a lawyer's unhurried manner. He had the kind of face that didn't perform patience, it just had it. He pulled a chair into the circle and sat. Tell me about the power of attorney document. So I told him. He asked 6 questions. Precise ones. Not warming up questions. Then he asked if I had documentation of the financial transfers. 40 years in the trades, I said. I document everything. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did. Good. Then you have leverage you may not know you have. What they attempted is on the aggressive end of what courts have found constitutes undue influence in elder financial cases. Combined with documented transfers of that magnitude, you're in a strong position. For what? For doing nothing, he said, which is often the strongest position. You don't need to sue them. You need to protect what's yours going forward. He spent the next 40 minutes explaining irrevocable trusts, charitable accounts, and the specific legal structures that would make my remaining savings inaccessible to any family member without triggering obligations I could control. He explained it the way good teachers explain things, as if the students' understanding mattered, and not just their compliance. 2,000 for the setup, he said. Pro bono for the first consultation. I shook his hand. The Millbrook Gazette ran a piece on the 3rd Tuesday of January. The reporter, a young woman named Cassandra Park, had called me after Helen Hartley mentioned the senior advocacy group at a city council meeting, and a council member had asked about the founding story. Cassandra met me at Millie's. Gwen hovered nearby with the coffee pot, which was her way of listening. Mr. Harwell, can you speak to the emotional dimension of what you experienced? I turned my coffee cup in my hands. My wife and I raised our daughter to be honest, to do right by people who do right by her. I thought we'd succeeded. Turns out I wasn't paying attention to the last chapter. He paused. We gave everything to our families. A lot of us in this group did. What we're saying now is that generosity was real, and it matters, and it doesn't give anyone the right to treat you like a resource they can access and discard. Cassandra looked up from her notepad. Your daughter hasn't commented publicly, she said. No. I'd expect that. What would you want her to know? I thought about Patricia. About the way she used to say that I showed love in receipts instead of words. About the fact that she was right, and also that receipts are a form of love. If they're honest, I'd want her to know I kept everyone, I said. The article ran on a Wednesday. By Friday, Helen had 11 new inquiries from seniors in Millbrook County. By the following Tuesday meeting, the room had 17 people. Gene brought his nephew, who turned out to be a CPA and offered to handle the fund's bookkeeping on a volunteer basis. Victor knew a woman from his church who'd run a nonprofit in Cleveland for 8 years and understood compliance filing. We called it the Millbrook Senior Preservation Fund. Not because the name was perfect, but because it said exactly what it did. The first action was covering Ruth's mortgage shortfall for February, while her son's defaulted loan worked through the legal process. The second was helping Gene contest the property listing through Carl's office, which resulted in his daughter withdrawing it after Carl sent a 3-paragraph letter that described the situation with the dispassionate precision of someone who had done this before and was not in a hurry. Diane called me on a Saturday afternoon in early February. I was at the community center helping move furniture for a different event when her name appeared on my screen. I stepped into the hallway. Her voice was careful in the way that careful voices are when they've been rehearsed. Dad, the kids are asking about you. I've thought about them every day. Sophie drew you a picture. Marcus keeps asking when you're coming to his basketball game. The information went somewhere in my chest and stayed there. You could come by, she said, if you wanted. I'd like to see the kids. Craig wants to. I waited. He wants to apologize. He knows what he did was wrong. People can know things, Diane. Knowing isn't the same as understanding. She was quiet. I'm not asking you to pretend nothing happened, she said finally. I'm asking you to let us try. There are things I need from both of you. I said this slowly, because I'd written it down 3 times in my notebook before I was willing to say it out loud. First, no more conversations about my finances, my accounts, or any legal documents. Second, I see the kids on a regular schedule, not at your discretion. Third, Craig completes the financial counseling he told Helen's group he would consider. And fourth, I will never be a guest in that house again. If I'm there, I'm family. There's a difference. Another silence. I know there is, she said. There was something in her voice that sounded like Patricia. Not the words, but the register. The place where honesty lives before it becomes speech. Okay. I went to Marcus's basketball game the following Saturday. I sat in the bleachers 3 rows up with a cup of bad gymnasium coffee and watched him trip over his own feet twice, make one improbable shot, and argue a call with an expression that was entirely his mother's. Diane sat beside me at the half. We didn't say much. We watched Marcus argue another call, and Sophie roll her eyes from 2 seats down, and we sat in the specific silence of 2 people who are related and damaged and trying. Craig found me in the parking lot after. He was wearing the sweatshirt from that morning at the motel, which I don't think was an accident. He didn't have a speech prepared. That was how I could tell he meant it. I made a calculation, he said. He was looking at his car keys. I thought I was being practical. I wasn't. I was being a coward and dressing it up in paperwork. I watched him. I've been in counseling for 3 weeks. Not because Diane asked. Because I looked at what I was doing and I didn't recognize myself. That's a beginning, I said. It's not enough. No. But it's honest. And honest is where you start. He put his hand out. I shook it. Not as forgiveness. Not completely. Not yet.
but as acknowledgement that there was somewhere to go from here if he was willing to walk toward it. The Millbrook Motor Inn is not where I live now. The apartment on Riverside Drive is small and mine in the way that nothing in Cloverfield Heights ever was. The furniture is second-hand and comfortable. The kitchen window looks out at the park where Patricia and I used to walk on Sunday evenings when the kids were young and the world was still the size of Millbrook, Ohio. Patricia's photo is on the windowsill now, not the nightstand. She's in the sun at Niagara Falls, squinting and laughing. And every morning I tell her what's happening and she doesn't answer, and I tell her anyway because it's a habit I don't intend to break. The Monday Fun meetings have grown to 23 regular members. Carl has taken on 4 pro bono cases that are working through the court system. Gene has his house. Ruth has a repayment plan. Victor spent Christmas with his son's family for the first time in 2 years, after a conversation in Carl's office that apparently involved raised voices, and then very quiet voices, and then the kind of agreement that holds because both sides knew the alternative. Sophie called me last week on Diane's phone, her voice high and rapid, telling me about a science project and a disagreement with a friend and a dream she'd had about a horse. I sat on the couch in my apartment and listened for 22 minutes and asked questions at the right intervals and didn't say a word about anything that mattered except her. That's the thing about grandchildren. They don't know about documents and down payments and the specific mathematics of a family that has lost its way. They only know if you show up. So, I show up. Marcus made the starting lineup last Tuesday. He called me himself, which he has never done before. On the phone Craig set up for him in January, he said, "Grandpa, I made it." And I could hear that he'd waited all day to tell me that, and I was someone he wanted to tell. I said, "I know, buddy. I was there when they posted the list." He asked how I knew, and I told him that I'd driven by the school, which was true. I didn't tell him I'd sat in my truck in the parking lot for 40 minutes waiting for the list to go up, or that I'd taken a photo of his name with my phone and sent it to Gwen at Millie's, or that she'd printed it out and put it on the corkboard behind the counter, where she pins things that deserve to be pinned. Some things you keep to yourself. Some things you keep in your shirt pocket in a notebook next to the numbers, because the numbers and the love are the same thing, even if it took me 68 years to say it out loud. Helen called last Thursday to tell me that a television station from Columbus wants to do a segment on the fund. She asked if I'd be willing to speak on camera. I thought about it for a moment. "Tell me when," I said. "There's no clean ending to this story because it isn't over. The wound in my family is real, and healing is not a moment. It is a direction." Diane and I have coffee on Friday mornings at Millie's, and we talk about the kids, and sometimes we talk about Craig, and sometimes we talk about Patricia, and sometimes we sit with our cups and say nothing at all, and that is also a kind of progress. What I know is this. I gave my family 41 years of early mornings and overtime and every resource I had, and I gave it willingly, and I would give most of it again. What I would not give is the part of myself that knows my own worth. What I would not sign is a document that turns love into a transaction you can close. The toolbox is by my front door. The mortgage transfer is canceled, and the savings are in a trust that carries my name and no one else's. The fund has $9,700 in it as of this Monday, and it is growing because people who have been left behind by the people who should have stayed know exactly how to find each other. And Marcus's name is on Gwen's corkboard in Millie's Diner on Garfield Street, and every morning when she opens up and turns on the lights and gets the coffee going, she walks past it, and that's enough. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave me a comment telling me what time it is where you are and what you took from this. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for being here.